Hello, and welcome to week number 4, pre-college math. My name is Mr. Shanklin. This is kind of weird. There's nobody here today. Usually we have a few students. All right, let's get going. This week we're going to be solving quadratics. If you watch the lesson tutorial, by completing the square, factoring, quadratic formula, and also using something that's called taking the square of both sides. I'm going to just use one problem. Well, I have to use two problems because you can't do it with just one. I'm going to go through this one problem, and I'm going to solve it all different methods that you're supposed to this week. So, for example, if I gave you x squared plus 8x plus 12 is equal to 0, and I'm going to do that 3 times. X squared plus 8x plus 12 is equal to 0, and x squared plus 8x plus 12 is equal to 0. Okay, so this week we're going to be solving by completing the square, by factoring, and using the quadratic formula. So let's start by factoring. If I was going to factor, and on this week's assessment, you do have to use the method that is stated, or else you won't get credit, so you do have to show your work. So in the first problem, if I was going to factor, remember, if we're factoring something, we take a look at the last number. What two numbers multiply to give me this term, but add up to the middle term? Well, 6 and 2 multiply to give you 12, but add up to 8. So I have x plus 6, x plus 2 is equal to 0. So now we use what is called the zero product property, which just says that if something's equal to, if you're multiplying two numbers together, one of them has to be 0 if it's an equal 0. So what makes this equal to 0? X equals negative 6. So that's one solution. What makes this equal to 0? X equals negative 2. So my two solutions using the factoring method would be negative 6 and negative 2. Now, if I'm solving by completing the square, then what we do is we write the first two terms down. So I go x squared plus 8x plus something is equal to, and then I'm going to bring the 12 over to this side. So that gives me negative 12 plus something. Okay, what am I going to add to both sides? Well, it's always half of this term squared. So half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16 here. I'm going to add 16 here. If I factor this out, it comes down to x plus 4, x plus 4. So I just write it this way, is equal to negative 12 plus 16, which is positive 4. The only way to get rid of a square is take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I'm left with x plus 4 is equal to 2. And now I'm going to subtract 4. Well, it's going to be plus or minus 2 here. So I have x plus 4 equals 2, and x plus 4 equals negative 2. So I'm going to subtract 4 here. I get x equals negative 2. I'm going to subtract 4 here. I get x equals negative 6. I get the exact same answer as I would if I was factoring. So that is called completing the square. Now, if I wanted to use a quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in this problem, my a term is 1, my b term is 8, my c term is 12. So if I plug it in here, I end up with negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, that's 64, minus 4 times 1 times 12, so that's 48, all over 2, that's 2a, 2 times 1, which is 2. 64 minus 48, so 64 minus 48 gives us, what is that going to be, 16? So now I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. Well, the square root of 16 is 4, so I have negative 8 plus 4 over 2, or negative 8 minus 4 over 2. Well, negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. That's one solution. Negative 8 minus 4 is negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. So you'll see that I get the same answer regardless of which way I do the problems. Yeah, this is quick. But hopefully you guys have seen this in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Pre-Calc, whatever classes you've taken before this. You should have seen ways to solve a quadratic formula. Now, the last way is if you ever, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. So if you ever get a problem, let's get rid of this, see if I can do that again, just clearing everything out. If you get a problem like this, where you're left with, if you're given something like x squared plus 4 equals 20, you can solve this without having to do the quadratic formula. I know it's a quadratic because it's to the second power, but it doesn't have a middle term. So I can just subtract 4 from both sides. I end up with x squared is equal to 16, and then I could just take the square root of both sides. So x equals plus or minus 4. Now, if I had something, let's say I had something like this, x minus 2 squared minus 4 is equal to 12. Okay? Well, I can still use the square root, but I have to isolate this part of the function. I have to isolate first. So if I added 4 to both sides, so now I have my squared term isolated. So now I can take the square root. So then I'd end up with x minus 2 is equal to positive 4, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 4. And again, I could solve by just adding 2 to both sides, so x equals 6. Or I could add 2 to both sides, and x equals negative 2. So that's another way. When you don't have a middle term, you can use this method to solve. All right. Let's get into the practice for this week. I would put the code in there, but there's nobody here to do the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen here. I guess I'm going to work out all the problems today in the practice. Yay! That's why it's nice having students in class. Let's see here. So pre-college math, that one should do it. All right. Let's see here. Is this problem number 1? Yep, it's problem number 1. Okay, so for this problem here, it says use the zero factor property to solve the equation. Usually that just means that you're going to, oops, I did not share my screen. You guys probably can't see that. All right. Oh, yeah, you can. Okay, I did. All right. So usually when they're talking about the zero factor property, it means to factor. So I've got x squared plus 7x plus 6 is equal to 0. I'm going to factor this. So what two numbers multiply to give me 6 that add up to 7? So I've got x plus 6, x plus 1. So my solutions are x equals negative 6 or x equals negative 1. So I'm going to go with letter C. All right, problem number 2. Use the square root property to solve the equation. Okay, so I've got x squared equals 49. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, but when I do that, I have to rewrite it as 2 separate problems. So x equals positive or negative 7. So that looks like letter A. Number 3, it says which number completes a square to form a perfect square trinomial? Remember, it's always half the middle term. So half of 12 is 6, and then square it. So I would add 36 to make it a perfect square. Number 4, solve x squared plus 10x equals 39 by completing the square. Awesome. So I've got x squared plus 10x plus something is equal to 39 plus something. So what am I going to add to both sides? Well, remember, it's always half of the middle term. So half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So I'm going to add 25 here. I'm going to add 25 here. So this becomes a perfect trinomial square. So it gives me x plus 5 quantity squared is equal to, what is that, 64? So now I can take the square root of both sides. Remember, when I do that, I end up with x plus 5 equals 8, or x plus 5 equals negative 8. If I subtract 5, I end up with x equals 3. If I subtract 5, I have x equals negative 13. So it looks like letter A is the correct choice for that. Number 5, it says solve 2x squared plus 9x plus 4 using the quadratic formula. Okay. When I use the quadratic formula, first thing I do is I figure out what A, B, and C are. My A value is 2. My B value is 9. My C value is 4. So negative B is negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared, which is 81, minus 4 times A times C. So is that 32? All over 2 times A. Well, A is 2 this time, so 2 times 2 is 4. All right, so I've got 81 minus 32, which gives me, what is that going to be? 49. So I have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4. The square root of 49 is 7, so negative 9 plus 7 over 4, or negative 9 minus 7 over 4. Negative 9 plus 7 is negative 2 divided by 4, so that's negative 1/2. And negative 9 minus 7 is negative 16 divided by 4 is negative 4. So I'm going to go with letter A again. Whew, too much talking. That's why I like when students come to class, have them working out. Which number completes the square to form a perfect square trinomial? Well, half of 7 is 7 halves, but then you have to square it, so that would give me 49 fourths. Number 7, solve x squared plus 8x plus 18 equals 0 by completing the square. All right, so I'm going to rewrite this as x squared plus 8x plus something is equal to negative 18 plus something. Okay, I just moved the 18 over to the side. Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So this, I'm going to have to add 16 here. So this is going to be x plus 4 quantity squared is equal to negative 2. Now, when we take the square root of both sides, you'll notice that we end up with an imaginary number. So we end up with x plus 4 is equal to the square root of negative 2, or x plus 4 is equal to negative square root of negative 2. So without knowing how to do imaginary answers, and they didn't ask us for imaginary answers, we would have to say that there's no real solutions. Because there are no real solutions. There's imaginary solutions, but there are no real solutions to this problem. Just imaginary. Number 8, it says 3x squared equals 5x plus 8 using the quadratic formula. Well, in order to use the quadratic formula, it has to be set equal to 0. So I'm just going to go 3x squared minus 5x minus 8 is equal to 0. And then my A value is 3, B value is negative 5, C value is negative 8. Negative B, so negative 5 is positive 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared, which is 25, minus 4 times A times C. Okay, so what is that going to be? Negative 32 times 3, so that's negative 96. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. 96 plus 25, is that 121? 121. So I end up with 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 over 6. Well, the square root of 121 is 11, so I've got 5 plus 11 over 6, or 5 minus 11 over 6. 5 plus 11, 16. So I'm left with 16 over 6, which I can break down to 8/3. And then 5 minus 11, which is negative 6 over 6, which is negative 1. So 8/3 and negative 1. Number 9, it says find all the zeros of the trinomial. Well, if I'm finding zeros, I'm usually just factoring. Okay, what 2 numbers multiply to give me negative 24, but add up to negative 2? All right, let's see here. 6 and 4. -6, x minus 6, x plus 4. So 6 and -4 would be my solutions, or my zeros. So letter B again. Find all the zeros of the trinomial. Okay, so I've got 6x squared plus x minus 40. Now, I don't know which way you guys want to do this. Factoring for some people when there's a number in front of the x squared is difficult. So I might just use Pythagorean theorem, yeah, a squared plus b squared. I might use the quadratic formula. Okay, so my a value is 6, my b value is 1, my c value is -40. So negative b, so that's -1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times a times c. So that's -160 times 6. -960? That doesn't seem right, because 961, I don't think that's a perfect square. Hmm. 961 is definitely not a perfect square. Huh. All right, well, that doesn't seem to be working. Did I do that wrong? Huh. I don't know. All right, I guess I'll try a different method. I'm going to factor it. I taught the cheater method to factoring, so that would be 6x here. That would be 6x here. I have to multiply the two outer terms together, so that'd be -240. What two numbers multiplied to -240? That add up to 1. All right, time for my calculator here. Got to start trying to figure out which two numbers. Let's see here. Get to my calculator here. I'm just going to try some numbers here. 240. Okay, 15 and 16. 15 times 16 is equal to 240. So I'm going to, it's got to equal positive, so that's going to be positive 16. It's going to be negative 15. And since I cheated with a 6, I have to divide a 6 out. Well, I can divide a 3 out of this one and a 2 out of this one. So that's going to give me 3x plus 8 and 2x minus 5. So my answer would be -8/3 and 5/2. -8/3 and 5/2, letter D. Now this is called the cheater method of factoring, and if you've had me before in any of my math classes, you know that my favorite method of factoring. Now we should have gotten the same answer using the quadratic formula. I just must have made a mistake multiplying or something, because it should work out. I mean, you should get the same answer regardless of which method you use. But I got stumped on one, so I just went to another one. All right. I hope you guys have a great week. Hope to see some of you next week. Bye.